Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 512 of 6 Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, May the 1st, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Don Tapscott, and what do I do besides being in a rock band? It's called Men in Suits. We used to do a concert every year, whether our public demanded it or not. But then we got good. We probably raised a couple of $1 million for good causes, actually. But mainly what I do is I run a think tank, and I do research into how the digital age changes business and society. And I've written, 15 books. Blockchain Revolution is my 16th that I've authored or co-authored. And I spend a lot of time on the road working with business and government leaders and giving speeches. And I've been doing this actually since the 1970s. When I first started working with the internet, we called it the ARPANET back then, multi-function workstations. And I was very fortunate to be running a group at Bell Northern Research, investigating how computers connected to a vast network of networks, as we called it, would change the world.
And it worked. And we have your co-author with us here.
Yes, this is Alex Tapscott. I'm not in a rock band, but I am.
You're a bit of a groupie, Alex.
Well, sometimes they ask me to join in a little cowbell. That's my specialty. But other than that, no, I'm just a big fan of Men in Suits. I am a recovering investment banker. I spent 7 years working in financial services, primarily in the technology, media, and telecom sector, where I helped advise and finance a number of Canada's largest and leading technology companies. It was in that capacity that I first got experienced and exposure to a whole bunch of the big trends that are changing the world. And the one that really stood out to me, and this was around 2013, was Bitcoin, before blockchain had really entered the vernacular. And the deeper I went down the rabbit hole, the more convinced I became that this was a really big deal. So I did the only logical thing anybody would do. I quit my job on Bay Street to start my own company. And now I work as an advisor helping companies in the blockchain space and in the technology industry in Canada generally scale their businesses by giving them access to capital, resources, customers, partners, and critical strategic sort of planning. So that's what I do.
And you also have a pretty well-known father who happens to be on this call too.
Yeah, I do. He's a famous rock star. Have you heard of him?
Exactly. Men in Suits, something like that, yeah. So I want to start with what I think is the worst question ever. And I think you guys are going to forever dread having to answer this question every single time. And the only reason I'm asking is because typically when I have these conversations, there is somewhat of a level set. People know what we're sort of talking about. But because blockchain is so new and there are very differing definitions of it, Don, I'm going to start with you. How do you define what blockchain is? And I hate myself for asking.
Well, self-hate is overrated. Well, it's actually, at one level, it's quite straightforward. Blockchains are the underlying technology of digital currencies like Bitcoin. Now, the Bitcoin blockchain is the one most people know about, but there are others, like Ethereum, which is of special interest to us. And what they are is a distributed ledger. Think of a giant global spreadsheet that runs on computers everywhere and that enables all of us to share not just information in a peer-to-peer way, but to share value, which we can't really do right now. I can send you a PowerPoint file or a PDF or a Word document. I can give you access to my website, but I'm not actually sending you the original information. I'm sending you a copy. And that works fine up until we start talking about not just information, but assets, digital assets. And we saw this in the Internet of Information, the first 4 decades, when people sent each other copies of assets called music. And it was problematic for the creators and owners of music, and really has contributed to a real mess today. Well, music is one kind of digital asset, but there are others like money, or like stock certificates, or frequent flyer points, or all kinds of digital assets, even electrical power. And because these digital assets require identification and settlement, up until now, we've had to rely on third-party intermediaries like banks, credit card companies, and so on to manage all of these transactions, to identify who we are, to store this information for us, to ensure that once I had sent you some money, I no longer have it. But now all of that can be done through blockchains. And that creates an extraordinary situation where, for the first time ever, we can have peer-to-peer creation and communication of value. And it's mind-boggling to think of the implications.
So Alex, do you prescribe and or / add on to that definition? Is that what gets you most excited about what this blockchain can do?
Well, absolutely. And the comparison to the first generation of the internet is a great one. During the first generation of the internet, a whole bunch of different types of information moved to ones and zeros from its original analog format. So things like mail, newspapers, voice, music, video content used to all come in different types of mediums, and now basically it all travels over the web. But if you look at value, there is still no native digital format for value. So even though we might access our bank accounts online, the underlying logic of money, of investments, of stocks, contracts, articles of incorporation, property, titles, deeds, are all basically paper-based. And if you doubt that statement, I challenge you by just visit a law firm or the bond department of any bank, and you'll see reams of paper stacked high, managed and controlled by centralized intermediaries. So blockchain technology is a new medium for value that offers the opportunity to make how we move and store money and other assets many orders of magnitude more quickly, less expensively, and perhaps most importantly, securely, in a way that can't be hacked, altered, defrauded, or otherwise expropriated. And that's got implications in a whole bunch of different industries. Now, I arrived at this idea by looking at it through the lens of financial services, and certainly the banking industry is poised for huge disruption. But this has applications in every single industry, all of which we really covered in the book.
So Don, I'm reading the book. I finished it. I loved it. I'm not just saying that because we're having this conversation, but it's funny. I was sort of trying to capture, like, when did I last feel this way about this technology that, as you're explaining it, I completely understand and get, and yet it's opaque in the sense of, how are we really going to roll this out? And it brought me back to 94 and the digital economy, where I read that and I thought, well, of course, and this makes perfect sense, but like, you couldn't, like, it was almost like Jello. I couldn't put my hands around what it means right now. Is that primarily how you see it as well, in terms of where it's at? Like, this is literally like when the digital economy was introduced in 94?
It is. And in the digital economy, when I wrote that book, eBay, Amazon, Google didn't exist. Google was not for another, 6-7 years.
Right.
And so you couldn't search the web. and Alta Vista notwithstanding, you still couldn't search the web like 6 years later until Google came along. So it feels a lot like the same thing, a similar thing to me, Mitch, that there's a lot of excitement. And when I wrote The Digital Economy, there was a certain degree of that book that was sort of hypotheses about what could occur. And like this book, it was an advocacy book. It said, if we do this, then we can bring about some very exciting changes in the world. And that's what this book is. I mean, Alex and I are both of the school that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we argue, here's what is to be done if this technology is to fulfill its potential.
So I want to circle back to something you said earlier, Don. We were talking about sending these copies, and Alex touched on it as well. And the way I always define it to people, especially when it came to music, because that was my world as well, long before I was digital, was that the issue was that you weren't sending a copy. You were actually sending another fully original version. And that every time you did this, you were propagating this other original version virtually. It wasn't like the old days where if you copied a record to a cassette, that cassette had a lesser than quality to it. It was hard to decipher between these two. Does blockchain take that away and create this sort of the trackable links or the ability to distribute it so that it doesn't have that terrible feature set to it?
Well, first of all, it is a copy. It's just a super high fidelity copy because it's digital. But what blockchains do is they prevent that from occurring at all. If I send you $100, I'm not sending you a copy, good or bad, or I'm not even sending you an original version. I'm actually transferring the money. And it's not like the money is moving from you to me in some kind of file. It's a change in a database, and that's the big difference.
Alex, talk a little bit about, you made a comment about, you started in financial, and I think a lot of people hear blockchain naturally and intuitively go to Bitcoin. You've given examples of where this is obviously more than sort of the fintech or financial technology evolution. Do you see any sort of clear path as to how to really get it from a pure branding and marketing perspective away from the conversation just being about how money is transferred?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible, and in fact, I think it's playing out now. And I think even Bitcoin, which started with, I'd say, a less than optimal reputation, has actually itself gone through a little bit of brand rehab over the past year or so, where a lot of banks originally thought, well, this blockchain idea is quite interesting, this idea of being able to move value in a secure peer-to-peer fashion, and to do so cheaply and more efficiently. But the idea of Bitcoin and this cryptocurrency kind of makes me uncomfortable as a bank. I don't like the idea of this global public network having any kind of access to what's happening inside my private business. Now, I think that's changing. And the reason is I think that the technology behind Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain, has demonstrated itself as one of the most powerful computing platforms in the world. And I think that you're seeing companies looking at how they might use that in their business. So today, if you've moved on from being just plain terrified of Bitcoin and of blockchain technology, you probably fit into one of two camps. You're either looking at this opportunistically, which is to say, maybe I can leverage this technology to improve the efficiency of my underlying business, so I can cut costs out of how I trade stocks, how I trade bonds, how I manage savings, how I extend credit, how I insure, how I do risk mitigation, all the sort of functions of the banking business. And that's a fair opinion, but I think the big opportunity here is to look at it strategically. The equivalent is to say in the 90s, someone's looking at the internet as a way to manage the yellow pages a little bit more efficiently when, of course, that business was doomed for extinction. So the opportunity here is to look at blockchain strategically, which is to say, how can I reinvent the underlying processes of my business, and will that create new market opportunities for me? I think one of the biggest ones is the fact that there are 3 billion people in the world that don't have access to financial services. And that's because it's largely speaking too expensive for banks to go after them. Well, if you've got a new technology platform that makes it basically free to do that, what kind of value could you create? What kind of new customers could you bring on? And ultimately, what kind of prosperity could you create in the world?
So this is where things get really interesting / scary. Don, if you're looking at this as this protocol that bypasses intermediaries and allows for these anonymous and secure transactions, they're permanently recorded in this public ledger, this digital ledger. Is this, when I say is it good or bad for banks, it's sort of a bad question. I'm thinking about it more from the perspective of banks are coming together and working on this and what it means, which then makes me feel like, is there some sort of grandiose financial cabal that's going to happen here to make it even more complex for people to have this sort of democratization of value transfer?
Well, it's an interesting issue for sure. How are the banks going to respond to this? And overall, this is an existential threat, and the smart ones will tell you that. We spent a lot of time, it's actually a project led by Alex, trying to figure out what is it that the financial services industry actually does. And he came up with 8 things, authenticating value, moving value, storing value, lending value, exchanging value, funding and investing in value, securing and ensuring value, and accounting for value. And wow, remember that, Alex. You must be impressed. And I think, and for every one of those, this technology could be very, very disruptive. On the other hand, the banks could embrace this technology to change the way the system works. And the way we described it is as the Rube Goldbergian financial services industry. It's kind of weird when you think about it. You tap your card in a Starbucks, and 3 days later, a transaction occurs after this bit stream has gone through a dozen computer systems, some of them being 1970s mainframes. And so the cabal comment is a good one. I mean, surely the banks ought to get together and embrace a common blockchain platform for the industry, a distributed ledger. It doesn't even need to have a digital currency necessarily associated with it. And they could radically alter the whole economics of the industry, reducing massive costs, reducing the time of settlement from hours or days or weeks in some cases for some kinds of value to instant. But to do that, they'd have to get around this problem of leaders of old paradigms having difficulty embracing the new. And they'd have to get around the second law, is that fierce competitors have great difficulty collaborating together in their own common self-interest. If they were to do that, I don't know if that would be a cabal or if it would just be a radically simplified, lower cost, and faster platform for the financial services industry that would kind of be in everybody's interest, especially the banks, but everybody else. I mean, the fact that we have common standards to be able to, to use credit cards or debit standards around the world, that's very helpful to us as consumers. I don't carry cash anymore, and I sure as heck don't carry American Express checks. I've almost forgot what they were called. And that's in my interest. So we're telling the banks, do it, embrace it. Don't be disintermediated by this technology, adopt it.
But Don, isn't that the issue? Because when you talk about the best interest and the democratization of this distribution of value, I don't think many people are going to raise their hands and say, and I feel the banks are providing that for us, and I think they're going to do the right thing here.
Well, again, we're staying out of the prediction business. We're in the advocacy.
we're in the achievement business.
Yeah, basically. And, if individuals, if organizations, if companies, NGOs, governments were to embrace this technology the way we describe it in the book, we do believe we could usher in a new halcyon age of prosperity. And this is one of the biggest dilemmas we talk about, is that the Internet of Information so far has done lots of really great stuff, but when you look at the really key economic measures, it's not so great. The big one being prosperity. There's actually growing social inequality. The 1% are doing great, but the 51st percentile is now declining, and most people are not benefiting. So what if we embrace this internet of value? Well, you could bring billions of people into a global economy. You could ensure that people who own a little piece of property have an immutable right to that property, unlike most today, which have flaky rights. We could create a whole new wave of very exciting entrepreneurship. We can ensure that the people who create value, like, say, musicians, actually get compensated for the value. We could create a real sharing economy, not the fake sharing economy that people talk about today. Companies like Uber. Uber is not a sharing company. It's a $65 billion service aggregator. Well, Uber could be displaced by a distributed application on the blockchain where the drivers are the real beneficiaries, at least before autonomous vehicles become fully functional. There's a caveat to just about all of this.
Yeah.
But so this is a pretty exciting time. Rather than the redistribution of wealth, we could change the way wealth gets created in the first place. We could democratize the creation of wealth. We could pre-distribute wealth.
Okay, so there's a lot of here that I want to unpack. Alex, talk to me a little bit about how you and Don are looking at this sort of what is a more prosperous world. And I'm asking the question because I still think the default position is to think monetarily, and that's not what I hear Don saying.
Well, I think there are a couple of different components to it, and Don's assessment of the world today is entirely accurate. And excluding even for a moment the fact that the middle class in the developed world, young people in the developed world, aren't moving forward, they're actually slipping back. There's a more fundamental problem globally, which is that 2.5 billion people in the world do not have access to financial services of any kind. 5.5 billion people in the world have a very tenuous right to the land on which they live. And not having access to banking and not having clear title to property basically precludes you from ever being a fully functioning participant in the global economy. It leads to the creation of what's called dark money in the dark economy, money that's held captive that never actually flows to the system. And this is a problem that's endemic in most of the world. We forget about it when we sit here in Toronto or Montreal. But even in places like Brazil and Mexico, the majority of people don't have a way to store value. They don't have a way to make payments. They don't have a way to get access to credit. And the government or some other corrupt force can arbitrarily expropriate their land. So there are some elemental problems that need to be addressed before prosperity can be created in the world. And maybe, just maybe, blockchain could provide a solution to that. So on the question of title, the big problem with most people's title is that what they own or what they think they own doesn't match what the government says they own, or doesn't match what someone else says they own. There's duplicate titles to the same piece of land, and when push comes to shove, a corrupt government is going to enforce the title that benefits them, not benefits the citizen. And that plays out time in and time out. So, for example, in Brazil, hundreds of thousands of people have been evicted from their land to build these massive stadiums, which basically enrich a whole bunch of plutocrats in these economies, even though a lot of these people had title to the land because it didn't match the title in the government database. In Honduras, the most recent president was ousted in a bloodless coup because he was expropriating title from people and handing it over to his buddies and cronies in government to give them some beachside property. Now, in Honduras, the government is working with a company called Factum to develop a blockchain-based land title registry where there is no single server that controls who owns what. All the records are accessible to everybody on a shared database. No single entity can change them, and everyone has perfect clarity into who owns what. Now, with that kind of a system, people could feel secure in knowing what they owned, and property ultimately is the basis for economic prosperity. It allows you to save money. It allows you to borrow against that land. It allows you to start a business. Without it, you're basically out of luck. So that's kind of point number one. And that's 5.5 billion out of the 7 billion people in the world, right? Then there's financial inclusion, which is this strange paradox where in most of the world, people have access to connectivity and they have access to smartphones. Most estimates say that by 2020, 75% of people will have access to an internet-enabled smartphone, basically a supercomputer in their hands. And yet, despite that, in most of the world, people don't have access to banking of any kind. So, for example, in Nicaragua, cell phone penetration is 90%, and only 10% of people have a bank account. Even in places like the United States, 45 million adults don't have a bank account. So that's a very troubling statistic, and its root is there are no clear reasons as to why that is, but there are a couple of big problems. Number one, it's very expensive to acquire a customer using the existing banking infrastructure. So if it costs $500 to acquire a customer that only has $100 in savings, you're never going to bother going after them. And the second issue is establishing identity. Most people have identity, but it's extremely localized. Only a few people in their village or in their community know about it. They don't have access to identification like a driver's license. They don't have access to utility bills because they don't have access to utilities. They don't have birth certificates or passports. Without those basic prerequisites for identity, it's very hard for a bank to know who you are. Blockchain creates new forms of establishing identity that will make it easier for people to gain access to those services. So that's not even the whole picture, but I wanted to address those two key things because those are the fundamental problems today with the lack of prosperity that gets created in most of the world. And there are solutions to be found in blockchain.
So Don, is that where the sort of story begins on this idea? Because I wanted to circle back to what you said about not the redistribution of wealth, but the pre-distribute of wealth. Is that the beginning of that story?
Yes, it is. To have democratized creation of wealth, you need to have people participating in the economy. Mm. And right now, there are billions who don't. And then, or billions who have flaky rights to participate. Like they own a piece of property, but as Alex said, some dictator can come along and say, actually, my government computer says my friend owns your property. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basically. You remember that. If a tiger's chasing you, the fact that nobody loves you is not a big thing on your mind. Yeah. Well, if you want to be an entrepreneur, the very starting point is that you can get a bank account and maybe that you can borrow some money and maybe that you can leverage some little asset that you have to help grow your business. Or maybe that you can sell stuff to others and take payments from them in something other than in cash.
So am I sensing, and I'm not sure if I'm sensing it or if it's not sort of being directly stated, that when we talk about the blockchain revolution, what we may in fact be talking about is a revolution where money as the predominant way in which value is exchanged gets pushed down a little bit and not number one for in terms of the economics of it? Is that sort of where we're going with this?
I'm not sure I'd put it that way.
Okay.
Because money is the way that we encode value, and it's the way that we move value around. And money's kind of central to all of this. Now, there are all kinds of ways of doing blockchains that don't involve a currency. But all of those who say, Bitcoin, Schmidtcoin, you can forget about all these digital currencies because the real pony in this pile here is a distributed ledger. We don't really buy that. Okay. Because distributed ledgers need a way of achieving consensus and of validating the truth. And we know that there's one that works really well today. And that's the proof of work model that's enabled through digital currencies and through mass collaboration and through miners who do all this work to establish trust and to verify transactions, and for that they get paid some currency from the platform.
So, Alex, I want you to sort of dance a little around the dark side of this too, because people hear anonymous, global transactions, alternate currencies. There's been a lot of media around the sort of darker side of what Bitcoin had and how money was being transferred, terrorists, things like that. What do we have to fear about this achievement, this future that we're trying to achieve? What do we have to fear?
Well, I think you can tell by now that Don and I are very excited by the opportunity to use this technology in very positive ways. But we made sure never to take a Pollyannish view when assessing what this for society. And in fact, throughout the book, throughout the research for the book, we kept coming across these very troubling issues that could happen if blockchain isn't marshaled or stewarded effectively. And we ended up putting a whole chapter together because there were quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And it's called Showstoppers. And there are 10 things that could go wrong with blockchain. And there's some of the ones that I think people might be familiar with. The well-worn one is that criminals will use it. It's a more effective way to launder money, finance terrorism, or crime. But there are other ones too. Like, we're talking about use cases that require this technology to scale significantly from where it is today. And that scalability is something that people need to address in order for this to become as important as we think it could be. There's questions as to whether or not leaders of the old paradigm, big companies or corrupt governments like the government of Iran, Russia, or China, might try and expropriate this technology and use it for their own ends as a tool either for great wealth creation or potentially, and more ominously, as a way to keep tabs on citizens. Don brought up the point of self-driving cars and the Internet of Things. Is blockchain the ultimate job killer? Is there potential in disintermediation to also disintermediate people from their livelihoods and their lines of work? So these are the kinds of issues that we had to address. But ultimately, we came down to this important conclusion, which is that are these reasons why blockchain is a bad idea, or are they implementation challenges to be overcome? And we basically decided that every single one of them was an implementation challenge that had to be overcome. They're meaningful, and each of them independently could create massive problems for this technology's long-term potential. But we think there are solutions to every single one of them, and we think this opportunity is so great that they deserve to be addressed. And in that, we concluded that what this technology needs and what the blockchain revolution needs is leadership and governance. Now, when people think about governance, they think about governments, but this is not about handing over the reins to governments or even intergovernmental organizations. Rather, what's needed here is multi-stakeholder governance, where all the different participants in the network, be they entrepreneurs, developers, law enforcement, government agencies, incumbent companies, and other civil society organizations and other stakeholders come together to create a whole bunch of principles by which to govern this network. And in doing so, we have a really good shot of overcoming those showstoppers and realizing the real potential of blockchain.
So Don, I mean, I can't help listen to Alex and think in my brain the classic saying, like, we can't have anything nice. There's no way we're going to do this well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm hopeful, and the reason is that I was losing hope the last few years about the prospects for the Internet of Information to enable the creation of a prosperous world. Because when you look around, the benefits have been asymmetrical. These powerful intermediaries, big companies, have captured most of the value. And at least with blockchains, we have another kick at the can, as we say. You know, you just look at something like data. There's this huge asset of the whole digital age. Maybe a new asset class, maybe even more important than previous asset classes like land or physical plant or money. I mean, Walter Wriston talked about 25 years ago, the former CEO of Citibank, that information about money was becoming more important than money itself. Well, we create this asset, but somebody else keeps it. and captures it and monetizes it, and not only prevents us from benefiting, but uses it in some ways to our disadvantage. Our privacy is being undermined quite importantly in this new world. So what if that data that we created, we got to keep? What if each of us had our own personal avatar on the blockchain, the virtual, Alex, the virtual Mitch, and the virtual Mitch knows more about you than you do. Right now, Facebook and Google and others own that, but what if you owned it? And it's not just that you would have a chance to monetize it. All this information that we create could be enormously helpful in helping each of us better manage our own lives, not just our health, but managing every aspect of our lives.
This captured value thing is becoming a very contentious issue, and there are many people bringing it forward. Even most recently, Douglas Rushkoff has in his book, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. The issue that a lot of people have is that the wealth is captured, but it's also staying in the smaller group. The old days where, everybody down to the janitor became a millionaire at Microsoft is now sort of retreated to this place where it's this top 1-digit percent. There's no distribution.
Yeah.
And you talk about that idea of the avatar, which sounds so appealing to anybody listening to this, right? The avatar can then decide if it's going to go into Facebook and what information is going to go back and forth because you yourself have that sort of connection to that ledger. But the current power centers have a vested interest in that not happening. So even speaking to the governance of it, they're going to want to seat at that table wouldn't they want to prevent that from happening?
Well, since when does the existence of powerful forces prevent agents of change for attempting to organize to bring about a new vernacular, a new order of things? Of course they will. But that just makes it more fun, doesn't it?
And my thoughts as well here, just that, things are changing so quickly that even though Facebook might resist change, every so often a new technology juggernaut comes along, and perhaps the next one isn't a centralized corporation like Facebook, but rather a distributed application that offers all of the same services and much more than what the existing companies do. And eventually, if those types of organizations get users and gain traction, then they could very well become the next industry standard. And I think that's broadly true in a lot of different industries. The music industry, Mitch, you said was near and dear to your heart. People say, well, the big labels still control the rights to a lot of music. That might be true, but 80% of all music that will ever be created, will be created in the next 10 years. And could the creators of that content look to blockchain as a way to connect directly with their consumers and their fans, and in doing so, themselves become the new industry standard? So change happens faster than we expect a lot of times, and I expect to see the same thing play out here.
Is it too simplistic to say that what we're talking about is basically day one of a new publishing platform where everything subsequently published on it will be trackable, ownable, transferable in that value? Is that too simplistic to say?
Well, it's not completely incorrect. You could add lots of nuance to the statement. Like, for example, a lot of what's published onto a blockchain can be anonymous, and that's a good thing. It's weird. You and I can do a transaction together, and we don't need to know who the other person is. All you care about is that you get paid, and all I care about is that I get the service. Or I get the land title, or I get the whatever. But on the other hand, blockchains enable a high degree of transparency as well, in that you can see trends, or you can intentionally make entries open, as many, many will be, because sunlight is a good disinfectant, and it's going to be important that we have transparency in all kinds of ways. Public donations to government officials, for example.
But it's so telling that it's coming at this moment in time where we're even trying to figure out, like, should corporations have a right to have their owners be private? That light disinfectant is the light that's being shined brightest today on financial institutions and corporations, offshoring, where taxes are being paid. I mean, all of these things are connected to something in a world where blockchain seems to be rising out now.
Absolutely, and it's a world where a lot of disinfecting
is needed.
Required.
I also don't think that corporations have a right to privacy in the same sense that people have a right to privacy. Right. Of course, companies have a right to protect trade secrets and information, but they, as artifacts of society, they have an obligation to act with integrity and act within the interest of all stakeholders. And a big part of that is being open and transparent about what they're doing. And so I think of blockchain as a tool that can accomplish two very difficult problems. One is by reinstating privacy as a fundamental right for individuals, but also compelling large organizations to be more open and transparent, both of which have huge net benefits for business and society. Okay,
so I want to close this out by asking about this idea of this new industrial revolution. It's a turn of phrase, or it's very, very profound and real. Don, do you really see this blockchain being the introduction of a new type of industrial revolution, or a part of something else?
Well, lots of people do talk about the fourth industrial revolution. And of course, Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum has a small book of that title. And it's actually a very helpful book, I think. But when you look at all the elements of the fourth industrial revolution, robotics, machine learning, big data, the extension of the mobile web, the infusion of this technology into all kinds of stuff, including biology, we're pretty convinced that blockchains are not another on the list, but are actually the foundation of all of that. Now, blockchains will be the foundation of the way that we organize and access data in the future. Smart agents running on the blockchain will be at the core of machine learning and artificial intelligence. If we do it right, blockchains will be driving robotics everywhere, and parts of robots will all be on blockchains. Now, again, there's a dark side. I mean, you can imagine smart agents that have a bank account now. It's sort of like a virus goes around hiring humans to do evil things.
Right.
But overall, this is not yet some interesting new technology. This is the foundation of this new industrial age.
Alex, do you see it as that as well? Is this the platform by which everything else gets built on top of? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the unifying technology. It's the general purpose technology upon which all of these other important developments and important innovations can stand. And I think actually a lot of them, in order to reach their potential, require blockchain. And Don mentioned the Internet of Things. If you've got trillions of connected devices communicating not only information but value to each other, you need a platform that enables them to do that securely, confidentially, and peer-to-peer. If a light bulb is metering electricity from a distributed power grid, it can't have the 2 or 3 cents it pays run through the Rube Goldberg machine of the current financial services industry and have the money land 3 days later. It needs to happen instantly, and it needs to happen securely. So in each of those different examples, blockchain is utterly foundational to realizing the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah, the way we say it in the book is the Internet of Everything needs a ledger of everything.
Right.
So just the last thought on that is, Don, do our businesses paying attention? Of course they are. Are they figuring out where? Is there a lot of sort of waiting on the side to see if this becomes the platform versus what we've had before? Is there full-on development happening here? Where are we at in the life cycle of this?
Well, like any innovation that's profound, like a whole new paradigm in something, you do get the innovator's dilemma. And you see that everywhere. Leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. Vested interests fight against change. So everywhere we go, there are now champions within the organization, and there are the naysayers. And we're going to get this with this book everywhere. I mean, so far the pre-publication reaction has been pretty spectacular. I mean, you've seen some of the quotes. I mean, it's breathtaking, to have your work called a masterpiece or the iconic book of our times or something like that. But we're going to get a lot of flack too. And I've been through this before. This is one situation where experience is helpful in a father-son combination. I'm warning Alex, get ready for the crap to hit the fan with some, with some journalists and some writers. And that's happened in 1994, and it will happen today. So this is, in some ways, there's a movement, and in many ways, there's a struggle. There's a conflict between the forces of change and the status quo. The good news for those who are on the side of change is that we have a burning platform. And, Mitch, of course, you know that idea, but some of your listeners, the idea is a simple one. You're somewhere where the cost of staying where you are become much greater than the cost of moving to something new. You're on an oil rig, it's on fire, you got to get off. So you look around our institutions today, the old model of the corporation, the old model of energy, the old model of transportation, the old model of government, the old model of democracy, our old models of culture, of healthcare, you name it. They're not working. And increasingly, it's becoming clear to large numbers of people that we have a huge disconnect. On the one hand are all these amazing technologies that seem miraculous in their potential. And on the other hand is our world that seems quite stalled in terms of progress. And, in a situation like that, I'll tell you, I'd rather be on the side of change.
It's amazing. It's a fascinating read. It's called Blockchain Revolution. It's been called an iconic book for these times, and it really is one of those books you pick up and you think, I'm sort of getting a real snapshot into the future. So great work, Don. Alex, thank you so much. Alex, let people know where they can best connect to you and learn more about you and the book.
Sure. They can follow me on Twitter at Alex Tapscott. They can check out the website for my advisory firm, www.npvinc.com. The best place to buy the book is on Amazon, and the best way to do so is in massive volume.
Baby needs shoes, right?
That's right.
Don, for people to connect to you?
On Twitter at dtapscott. And also, we do have a website for the book, which is www.blockchain-revolution.com.
Great. Thanks, guys, so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.